Hey, what's up, y'all? This is Michael Franti here. Welcome to the Stay Human podcast. I am super happy to have one of my friends, somebody who I just admire their ability to communicate on any subject, but especially the subject of health. He was on Oprah for 5 years. He's on season 12 of his own show. He's an attending physician at New York Presbyterian Columbia Medical Center, where he's a cardiac surgeon there. But all around, this is just somebody who's a thinker and a leader. Please welcome Dr. Oz. How you doing, Oz?
Right back at you. I tell you, I listened to your music for years. Finally got a chance to meet you. And people may not know this about you, but you play gigs with a ton of passion and heart. And you're doing a charity event for a friend of mine. And I walked in there and said, I can't believe Michael Franti's here. Did you know that's Michael Franti? And everyone thought I had lost my mind.
Yeah.
So it's been a blessing to watch your work. I love what you represent and the passion that you bring to making the world a better place.
Thanks, Oz. You know, the Stay Human podcast is all about the belief that I have that there's no one you wouldn't love if you knew their story. So before we go into anything to talk about anything that's happening in the world, I want people to learn things about you that they never would have known before. So tell me about how you grew up. Where were you born? Where were you raised? What was your family like?
So my parents are immigrants from Turkey. And they subsequently moved back because they, like many Turks, they loved being in Turkey so much. They didn't want to live anywhere else. So I grew up with a good part of my life in Turkey. Every summer we'd go back. The day school ended. I always come back to school a couple weeks late. My mom adored being with her family. And so I got a very different perspective of life while I was in Turkey. And I remember when I was growing up, 60s and 70s, Turkey had gone through the war, and like most of Eastern Europe and that part of the world, they were just sort of catching up to what was happening in the West. The United States, meanwhile, was sort of on top of our game. And so when I looked at challenges, events, other countries, it was very different when I was in this country going to school versus when I was with my family in Turkey. And I began to appreciate that you could have two very different perspectives on the exact same problem as you're pointing out, and both of them make sense. But if you can understand the other person, basically their language, their thought process, you're much more impactfully able to change their mind. Or maybe you don't want to change their mind. Maybe you want to change your mind. And so my whole upbringing was about this sort of schizophrenic experience and living with one foot here, one foot in Turkey. And as I got older, I did my schooling. I went to college at Harvard, and I went to medical school and business school, actually, because I was interested in how money changes health. I wasn't interested in investing. I was interested in understanding it so that I could make sure medicine was honored the patients and not honored the dollar, which sometimes happens. Yeah. And that sort of got me much more stable in my understanding of how the world worked. But I never lost the insights of growing up in a Muslim country with a group of focus points that are very different from the ones that I would have otherwise have if I just grew up in America.
Yeah. What was the hardest thing for you as a kid? What was the most challenging part of being a kid?
I didn't fit in. I had this weird name. There were no Turks in my class. There were no Turks in my town. My parents, spoke broken English. There were some words I didn't know because we didn't use them at home. And I realized that there were a bunch of kids who just got it. They understood the game, often because their parents had told them. Sometimes because they, had a mentor, someone who stepped in. So I realized early on that as much as I was going to be basing who I am on the values I was given by my parents, I needed to understand how America worked. That applied to playing sports is a good example. So I love playing sports. I still do. I played football in high school and in college. I played water polo. I mean, every day I would get up and do something. Before I got on with you here in this country, it's the morning. Still, I know it's later in where you are, but I've already worked out and done all my stuff. So I'm fanatical about it, but not because I want to stay in the best shape possible. It helps me keep my mind focused. It helps me use daily life experiences to decide whether I should go right or left. So when I was in high school, my dad.
And did you find that when you were Did you find that when you were a kid? Is that something you learned? Like, man, I'm not fitting in. Maybe I'm having some challenges between home and school and the different trying to navigate all this. But sports, was it like a leavening for you? Was it a place to find peace of mind, or did you find equality there? What was it that you found?
Even more than leavening, it was an elixir for me. There was definitely equality, but the life lessons are much easier to understand on a playing field. If you work harder, you perform better. If you perform better, you might win. And there's other life lessons, like the obvious one where it doesn't matter if you win or lose, is how you play, which I think is BS. It does matter that you win or lose, but it matters even more how you play. And the reason for that is the game is not just the 60-minute event you're in. The game is the game of life. So if you're a jerk and you're not a good teammate and you don't treat people well, and you don't with great humility win and with some resilience lose, then then you're not going to do well long term. So although you want to win that game, it's not nearly as important as being a better person as you play the game. And those were lessons that I knew I was learning. My dad did not want me playing sports because in Turkey, that's not what you do. You study, because the most important thing to my dad was getting an education. So I couldn't convince my parents that playing sports would make me a better student. As far as they were concerned, it was a zero-sum game. And that's a good example of a beautiful lesson that I got living in this country. I think a lot of Americans appreciate the importance of extracurricular activities. It could be music. And you're an athlete too, but it could be music, it could be arts. It doesn't frankly matter. Ways of stretching your brain to allow your creativity to make you work not just harder, but smarter is imbued in us. We don't call ourselves United Statesians, right? Because America is the continent, but the United States is an idea. And ideas have to shift, and we're inventors at our core. So our ability to walk and chew gum at the same time, i.e. play sports and still study hard, is representative of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So then you're in school, and then at what point did you think like, man, maybe I want to be a surgeon? Was there an aha moment for you, or was it just like kind of going along and then I found this thing?
Oh no, it was an aha moment. My dad's a surgeon, and I would walk through the hospitals with him, and I'd see his, I'd have to like sprint next to him because he'd always walk quickly. And I was a little kid, 8-year-old, 9-year-old. And I would see him walk into patients' rooms. And he's a chest surgeon, so he'd put needles in them to drain fluids and stuff. This painful stuff, right? They always wanted to see him.
Yeah.
They always had a smile on their face when he left. The fact that he could deliver bad news and do things that were uncomfortable, but people still respected him, was incredibly fulfilling to me. And just the connection that patients had with their doctor, my father in this case, made me believe I would love to do that. And the nice thing about surgery is you can see your results right there. And there's a physicality to it, like sports. You can see right then, did I do my best? What can I do differently? And when someone dies, Michael, you never know if they died because you made one mistake or 10 mistakes. So you always blame yourself. And you always think, God darn it, if I just gone left instead of right, if I cut this instead of that, if I put this stitch in instead of that stitch, this person will still be alive. I can't live with that. I got to get better. So it drives you with a great passion towards excellence because the scale is so important.
And so then you decided at what point that you were going to go to medical school? You knew that from when you were like 9 years old or 10
I'll tell you a little story
or did you
you might benefit from hearing this, and the listeners as well. So I was 7 years of age. I was in an ice cream parlor in Wilmington, Delaware, which is where we were growing up. And I was second in line. There's a 10-year-old kid in front of me. And when there's a kid 3 years older than you at that age, it's obvious that they're a lot bigger, they're a lot more mature. So my dad asked him what he wanted to be because we're waiting for ice cream, making small talk. And the kid said, "I don't know, I'm 10." And my dad said, "All right." And the kid got his ice cream left. My dad turned to me and said, "I don't care what you say, but I never want to hear that answer because you have to be aimed at something. You can change your mind as many times as you want, but you can't go in life without a target." So he said, "What do you want to be?" So I reflexively said, "A surgeon." And I never changed my mind.
Yeah. I've got some friends who ask their kids, they're called the Unstoppable family. They're friends of mine. And their philosophy is you ask your kids, what do you want to be right now? Not what do you want to be 20 years from now? What do you want to be right now? And inspire kids to find that passion, that love. If you want to be whatever, you want to be a clothing designer, let's get you a sewing machine. Let's figure out how to make clothes or whatever it is. So I love that. As a parent, how have you tried to impart that kind of thing that like what your dad did? How have you imparted that on your kids?
So my kids always give me a hard time because as much as I wanted them to study hard, I always told them they were studying too hard. And the reason I said that was because when we wanted to go play sports or do something, and they said, "I got homework." So you can always do homework. There will always be homework. There'll always be things to do. The question you have to ask yourself is, were you so inefficient today that you can't carve out 15, 20 minutes to play pickup basketball game with me? Or, we're not talking about wasting the entire evening watching television, eating popcorn. We're talking about life activities that would bind us together. For example, our family, we have something called the Oz Olympics, where we have 4 events. There are 4 children. So I know their personalities, obviously, because I raised them with my wife, Lisa. Best thing I ever did, by the way, big tip, is my, and you made the same decision as marry someone that's better than you. But we take all 4 of the kids, and they all be better at one activity than anybody else. Those were the 4 events. We knew each one would win one game. The question was, would they win someone else's game that day? And at least challenge for it. And so we would do these events, and they were, our board games would be full contact. I mean, full contact Monopoly is a painful experience. but I would get them to appreciate that, and they all went to great schools, and they're doing well. In part because we taught them early on that we expected them to do more than just study.
School right now is incredibly hard for families. I talk to families all the time who are, they're doing their job, or maybe they're working from home now for the first time, and they're trying to teach their kids at home, and becoming, full-time teachers as well as parents, and as well as doing their work on top of it. What advice do you have for families who are trying to navigate, first of all, the practical side of the pandemic like that, in quarantining, but secondly, just the emotional side? There's a lot to, just being with the same people in the same space, whatever cracks are there, whatever issues are there, they tend to come up.
Well, the old adage that the reason that you don't like your relatives is if they weren't related to you, you wouldn't be with them. But I actually don't think that's right. I think there's a there's a poetic license around relatives that they get to push your buttons and you can't get rid of them. They're there. So it means you need to have your buttons pushed. So you got to learn from that.
And that helps you in the end, because it brings things up for you that you might not be able to take or might not be willing to take a look at otherwise. So.
Yeah, there's a whole psychology that is completely based on family dynamics, explaining almost every nuance and weirdness in your behavior based on, as you're growing, your connection to everybody else, which means you got to keep processing it. And there's great opportunities, which is why kin and relatives are such an important part of our species. We are hardwired to hang with people, even if we don't like them, because we're better off for having done it. For the pandemic, you don't want to divorce the psychological impact, which is part 2 of your question, from the actual risk of the virus, because they are related. And the big debate, and people ignore one side of the other frequently, which is why you seem to have 2 sides of these politicized debates, is if you're a physician that's focused on the epidemiology of the virus and you want to shut down because you don't want anyone to be at risk, that's an understandable perspective. But the penalty for having done that is that you increase deaths of despair, of loneliness. You create long-term hazards, especially in young children who have basically PTSD from being fearful in their formative years and don't get the support as they are going through schooling from the teachers and mentors that would otherwise exist there. My greatest mentor in my life was my football coach in high school. If I had not spent time with him, I wouldn't be where I am right now. One of the first guests I ever had on my show was Steve Hyde, because he was so important to me. And just he taught me things I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So I don't think we can fairly ignore all that. So what do you do to mix them together? It's 80-20 rule. 80, and I've looked at this so carefully and covered it extensively on my show. 80% of protecting yourself against the pandemic are a couple simple topics. 20% are the hundreds of other things you could do that are far less important. So as an example, avoiding time with in a poorly ventilated indoor space with a bunch of people you don't know is really important. Washing your vegetables to get the virus off them, not important. You can do it. It's not going to hurt you. It might be trivially safer, but we've never in the entire planet's history with this COVID-19 ever had a case that was passed by eating it. It doesn't seem to get into our bodies when you eat the COVID. So you can do both. But I'd rather you focus on the first one because that matters and not waste your time on the second one, which makes you neurotic and impossible to be around.
In the last year since we saw each other, I've gone on a real health journey to I'm 54 years old, and I was like, how do I keep myself alive, basically? I mean, with the pandemic, people are suddenly facing that not only is it enough to just eat an organic salad once a week and go to a yoga class on Saturday? That's not wellness. We have to really be taking care of our health completely. And a big part of it for me has been sleep. All the things that I learned this last year about nutrition and eating better, eating less sugar, eating more proteins. and training every day, making sure I get my heart rate elevated, make sure in addition to all the yoga and stretching I've done, but doing weight training, running, cardio things. In addition to all that, I've found just how important getting the rest is, and that if I don't sleep, I'm not able to function as the first of all, as the kind person I want to show up as, but also my body doesn't get enough chance to rest. And I know that you've just come out with a whole bunch of things to help people sleep, but maybe if you could just talk about the importance of sleep first and then go into that.
Single most underappreciated problem in America, in fact, the world, is sleep. I've looked at this over and over again. It is shocking to me how many health problems arise because of poor sleep. Forget about productivity and creativity and your ability to just be a happy person, which are all valuable reasons to sleep as well. But your incidence of high blood pressure goes up when you're unable to sleep well. Again, your body never feels like it can relax. Issues around dementia seem to increase. Weight gain for sure goes up. Here's the thing. Your brain craves four things. Your brain craves food and water and sex and sleep. So people can take care of the sex themselves. But if you don't sleep, you're going to crave food and water. And most people don't understand the difference between food and water, so they just go for the food. And you don't just crave any food, you crave carbohydrates. So independent of the obvious reality that if you're sleeping, you can't actually eat while you're sleeping, there's also the bigger problem, which is when you're awake, if you haven't slept, you have to have carbs. That's why middle of the afternoon, there's this bewitching hour, because people are getting tired from having made decisions all day long. They often did not sleep well the night before. So they have to put carbs in their brain to keep it going, to jazz it up, to keep going, because otherwise they'll just pass out. They can't do it. They can't function. So how do you sleep better? That's the question. And by the way, I just stopped early, but allergies, asthma, cancer rates, all of these seem to increase when people don't sleep well. And the solutions, because there's nihilism is the biggest enemy here. People think they can't do it better. The solutions are there. They have been studied and they work. So you mentioned, I do have a sleep line that we just came out with. I did it because I wanted to democratize sleep. The ideas that work best tend to be more expensive, but they don't have to be expensive. They can be made affordably, especially with modern technologies. And some of these new bed companies are really great at packaging things up so you don't have to spend $500 to flatbed the things to your home. So for example, an adjustable frame, which is the under part of the bed that elevates the head of the bed, in a clinical trials that we have done, almost completely eliminates snoring, which means that you don't have one of the biggest problems for sleep divorce, right? But also you and your spouse or whoever's with you in bed can both sleep better. And even the sleeper who wakes themselves up with their snoring can benefit. They tend to be expensive, but the ones that we work with the #1 seller on Amazon, but the Good Life brands purposely make these affordable, so you can get them in a UPS box. It's inexpensive. You put it together yourself in about 5 minutes, and then you save yourself a lot of money, and you have what everyone else who knows this game has. I can go on and on. There's engineered down because we don't want to kill birds to make down. There's these weighted blankets, again, clinically shown to benefit people who have difficulty sleeping because you feel like you're being cuddled as you fall asleep. But that's like the easy part. Then there's the things you have to start doing now, which is develop a sleep hygiene protocol, which means cool the room down. The colder the room, Michael, the better off you are. Whoever wants the room cold, they win. So ideally under 68 degrees Fahrenheit. And then you want a blanket on you that doesn't make you too hot, so a comforter that's cool. And then you want to make sure you don't have a lot of clothes on because you don't want to be restricted. Ideally, no clothes is best with a good comforter. Then you sort of feel like you're hibernating in a cold room. Then if you can make it dark and quiet, or if you can't make it quiet, then at least put on a sleep machine. Then you actually have the recipe for success in sleep.
What about the phone? That was one of the things that I've learned is if I'm on my phone right before I sleep, I have the worst time trying to get to sleep. My mind is processing things. I'm still seeing like the flashing of the lights as I close my eyes. And then also in the middle of the night, waking up, and which I do every night, and regardless of whether I'm sleeping well or not, I always wake up 3:30 or 4 in the morning. And if the phone's next to my bed, and if I see that little light go off or even just sense it, I'm picking up the phone, and now there's a list of 20 alerts, news alerts. Somebody texted me from the other side of the world, this thing, and then I open the phone. And once I open the phone, it's like, forget about it. It's like, it's like the worst addictive, crack to a crackhead. Yeah.
Let's go through this. First of all, don't blame yourself for waking up in the middle of the night. We're supposed to. Okay. Chaucer would always write about the midnight flings, because historically what happened would you go to sleep around 7 or 8 because that's when it got dark. This is, I'm talking about a couple hundred years ago. You'd wake up in the middle of the night, have sex. eat something, just, because you wouldn't want to be defenseless for 8 hours. So there's no survival value of being defenseless for 8 hours. One of the reasons we know sleep is really, really important is because if it wasn't, evolution would have killed off the people who are sleeping, because you're sleeping next to a tree and a snake comes and eats you because you're for 8 hours you've been out of it. So we're supposed to wake up periodically during the night. When we do wake up, we need to get back to sleep quickly. You point out something that's really critical. There's two issues with the phones. There's the literal light that actually turns off the brain's ability to make melatonin. Melatonin is the circadian rhythm hormone of the brain. It tells you that it's nighttime and time to go to bed. So if you shock it and don't let it work because you're looking at bright screens, any screen, doesn't have to be your phone, TV, iPad, whatever, it will prevent the melatonin from doing what it's supposed to do and help you. So if you can read a book, it's much better than reading a screen for the last 20 minutes before you go to bed. In fact, in my room, we don't have bright lights the way a lot of people do. These LED lights, you can buy them so they don't emit the bright white light. They still look white, but they're not releasing that frequency. They're the same price as other LED lights, but they're designed for sleep. So the lamp next to my bedstand, and yours as well, should have one of these LED lights that doesn't shut off your melatonin. Now, the second issue with the phone is your point, and you make a great point. There's no good news at 10 o'clock at night, right? Nothing's going to come to you in your inbox that's going to make you sleep better. Only bad things are sent to you at that hour. So I purposely put my phone, to the side. I have there's a sleep score app that I use that actually measures my sleep at night that I turn on, and it purposely dims the phone and doesn't allow alerts to show up. So unless there's an emergency, they can't get in touch with me.
Right now we're entering into the holiday season, and people want to see their families. People have been craving, missing people. Sometimes people haven't seen each other, who live in opposite sides of the city, sometimes opposite sides of the country. How do families get together safely over the holidays?
Well, the most important thing is to be cautious before you're with your family. So if the week before the big meal, big gathering, you're on your best behavior. You're not mosh pit diving, right? And being infected with COVID, so that you.
Well, I might be, but
you might be, right? But you don't want to show up with your people that you love and care about with asymptomatic case of COVID because you were bar hopping the week before. So if you're cautious and careful and really thoughtful about any symptoms you might have, that helps a lot. Second, but people always say, they see it as binary. It's not. Indoor activities are 20 times more likely to cause COVID spread than outdoor activities. 20 times. Wow. So if you can stay outside or keep the screen doors, but not the regular doors closed, or keep your windows open so it's well ventilated, change your filters on your home, all these make a huge difference because they make the experience less likely to be an infectious super spreader one. And then finally, I wouldn't mix pandemic pods. The people that you're normally spending time with, they can come over. There's maybe one other pod you'll let in. So maybe it's you and your sister's family getting together. So it's not the huge gathering, but let's be honest. I mean, if you had a dozen people for Thanksgiving, that's a pretty good Thanksgiving. And that's probably the limit that I would put on most gatherings in private homes. And in addition to the other things that I just mentioned, that would make it acceptably safe to me. The one caveat is if there was a really vulnerable member of the family, someone who was older and with chronic medical problems, makes them likely to have an issue with COVID if they do get it, then that person I wouldn't put inside of a house with 12 people. But if I have got a bunch of 18-year-olds hanging together at the house and they're being sensible about when they're not in the house, if we're wrong and one of them gets COVID, the chance of them having a problem is. So it's a big difference.
You were very outspoken early on in the pandemic about vaccine, and now we've had a number of new vaccines that have appeared that seem very promising. How can people feel safe about it? There's a lot of people who don't want to give their kids vaccines at all. Period. The end. But now we've got some that are out there. How can people know that this is safe?
In my own family, we have this battle. My wife is not a big vaccine fan. She relents eventually, but she's asking the same questions that 1/3 of America asks. Hey, how do they do this? They rushed it through. Operation Warp Speed meant they cut corners. I understand exactly why people feel that way. And I'll give you the facts around it, but I have an even better idea. We don't have enough vaccine. Don't go first. If you're one of the people who's worried about vaccines, Just don't get it till everybody in your neighborhood's gotten one, till your relatives have gotten it, and then see how they do. And if over a couple months you feel like, hey, you know what, I've been thinking about it, they all seem to be getting better and they're getting back to life and there doesn't seem to be any more COVID being spread because it's working so well, I'll go ahead and get my vaccine. And I think that's a rational way of attracting people towards it, because forcing them to get vaccine is not going to happen. But let me give you a couple of facts. First off, these studies have been done on tens of thousands of people who are meticulously followed for any side effects. The side effects so far, I've actually interviewed a bunch of people on my show who've been in these trials. The side effects are basically that they have a sore arm. You have to get 2 shots. So you get a sore arm the first time, and the second time you have sort of a fever for 8 hours, but not a bad one. You just feel tired. And then you're better. And that's the basic course of the vaccine. The benefits, as we've mentioned, are over 90% at protecting you, and which is so much better than, like the flu vaccine is 60% probably beneficial. To get approved, you only need to be 50% beneficial. At 95%, you're just so much better than all the other vaccines we have against a really bad virus. It is I don't care what you say about overreactions and all, but you don't want to get COVID-19. There's all kinds of reasons. It does kill some people. It can cause chronic issues in a lot of folks. And if you don't have those problems, hopefully, you're just sick, really sick for 2 weeks. So why go through it if you don't need to?
Yeah. Assuming that the vaccines work and that they get out to enough people that we can really get COVID under control, COVID-19 under control. What about COVID 21, 22, 25? What have we learned from this COVID-19 experience that we can take into the next pandemic, which could be even worse than this one? Could be more dangerous, more lethal than this one.
Michael, I do so many interviews. I get asked that question so rarely, and it's probably the most important question. Thanks for being insightful and pushing us to where we need to be, which is not what the problem is today. Because thankfully, with these vaccines, I think by the summer, we'll be able to go back to most of the things that we had wanted to do in life. But there are definitely, absolutely, positively going to be more of these pandemics. And they seem to be happening every 2 to 3 years. Humans have encroached on wildlife. We pay for things that we shouldn't. So it pulls animals out of the wild that shouldn't be there. Bats do have lots of viruses. It's not their fault. They live with them. They're not plagued by it. When we encroach on them or the animals that they are involved with, we're going to get other crazy viruses spread into our species. So a couple of things. First off, if we can minimize those mistakes, it would be great. Being more cautious and thoughtful about the planet and our role in it would absolutely have some good karma for us. But I do think the major focus right now, just in terms of a safety net, is these vaccine technologies. The ones that have been studied so far have never been used in humans before. But if I can explain it for a second, it might make sense why I'm optimistic about it.
Yeah.
Historically, the way that vaccines, the original smallpox vaccine was actually evolved in Turkey, although it was first found by in the British Isles. But the concept was that all these young maidens who would milk the cows would not get smallpox. They'd get something called cowpox, which is a very benign version of a cousin virus, but it would protect you against smallpox, which was a lethal problem at the time, and it still is today, even though we pretty much eradicated it. So Jenner got these little pustules of cowpox from people who had been infected, was able to inoculate others, and was able to protect populations against smallpox. Back then, by the way, this is back in the 1820s and 30s, the parents would hide their children in the chimneys because they didn't want them getting vaccinated. They were scared. And so the anti-vax movement is not new. It's been around since the first vaccines were ever created. So I completely understand that a lot of parents say, I love my children more than anybody else can. So I don't want them put at risk. Convince me that you love my children as much as I do. And it's hard for doctors to accomplish that goal because moms will always love their kids more than a doctor could. How could you possibly compete with a mother's love? But the wisdom here is that instead of taking viruses that are lethal and weakening them or killing them and hoping they're all dead and then putting it into you, which is, for example, what polio vaccines were originally, instead, just take some very distinctive attribute of the virus, like in this case, the crown, the spike protein of the coronavirus. It's called corona because it's got a crown on it. The tips of the crown have little spikes. So those spikes latch onto your cells and get the virus to get into you. But our body recognizes the crown. It recognizes the spikes, even though they're not dangerous to us, right? The virus is the actual, the bad boys underneath the crown. but the crown is it's the hat that it's wearing. So we can recognize that and kill it. So scientists said, okay, we're going to do what works in cancer therapies, which is we're going to take a piece of the crown, wrap it in some fat, and put it into your body. Your body's going to see the crown, make antibodies against it, and then when you see the real virus, it's going to kill it before it can get into your body. Now, the crown itself, as I pointed out several times, does not have anything negative, can't hurt you, can't do anything bad to you. So you can't get COVID-19 from just having the crown. And that's a whole different way of making vaccines, both of which, the two so far, have worked remarkably well, efficiently with minimal side effects. So I think that technology will continue to be matured over the next few years. So as we get COVID-24, COVID-27, COVID-30, we're going to be able to make vaccines in less than a year, that now that we know the principle works, and protect ourselves. But I don't think the long-term game is to make better and better vaccines. The long-term game is for us to stop encroaching on the world around us, to let viruses that live happily and safely in the animal species stay there and not be pulled into wet markets or all the different places that it ends up potentially exposing us.
Yeah. I hope we also take away the fact that there are economic concerns, there are mental health concerns, there are many factors that go into this, and as we study epidemiology in the future, I hope that it includes all of those things into this idea of how we address pandemics for the future, and the politics weighs into it as well. You are one of the people who that I really dig and admire because of your humanity. I love the fact that anytime we've had a conversation about anything, it always comes back to humanity. Whether we're talking about gun violence, whether we're talking about health issues, or we're talking about sports, whatever. What does it mean to you? And this is my final question. What does it mean to you to be human, and how do you stay human? How do you hold on to your humanity, you personally?
I went to a place called Göbekli Tepe. It's a place in Turkey. It means Potbelly Hill. It's the first place that humans lived in civilization. And to me, the ability to live with other humans defines your humanity. And what I learned in this incredibly spiritual place is that humans have always sensed that there was something bigger than us. And we have these archetypes, these visions of what needs to have presence in our life. And we can fill these vessels, these urns, these archetypes with whatever fluid you want. Some use religion. You can use other life philosophies, music, physicality, but you have to fill them. You can't ignore the deeper connection we have to each other. And that collective unconscious draws us. We have to feel like we're raindrops falling into the ocean of humanity. If we don't sense that, we will be miserable people and bitter against those around us because something isn't right. And it's because it's subconscious, we don't even realize it. But I think much of what tears at the fabric of the modern world is we forget that deeper reality and we get stuck at the surface level, which is why I'm always concerned about politics, which has replaced religion in many parts of the world. But politics was not designed to be a religion. Politics is designed to divide us because we got to make decisions, go left or go right. Religion or faith or the bond, the awareness that we're not the biggest thing in the room. There's something bigger than us. That's designed to bond us, and we can't forfeit that without sacrificing our humanity.
Thanks a lot for being here today, Oz. I know you got an incredibly busy schedule. How can folks find out about your sleep products? And you've got a new season that's just about to start or has started, right?
Yeah, we just started the 12th season of Dr. Oz. So droz.com is the website. drozsleep.com is the sleep products. But I got to say, if you just follow me on social media, which is, I'm easy to find that we got about 15 million people follow me in different platforms. Pick any one you want to be on. I'm even on TikTok. God bless them. And in different, competing with my kids. So get involved. That's my big message to you. Engage, talk, be big, be the person you can be.
Right on. Thanks a lot. This is Dr. Oz with us today. And this has been a great episode of the Stay Human podcast. Thank you, Oz, and happy holidays to you.
Love you, Michael. Love the entire family. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Peace.